So welcome everyone to another webinar hosted by Radiant Law. Today we're talking about a practical way to prioritize legal work, and really delighted to be joined by Lorna to hear from her. Lorna, you and I have spoken a bit, but I'm very excited for this topic and to learn from you. Quick intros. Let me start first, and then Lorna, we can hear all about you. So Ian Teague, I have been at Radiant Law 11 years this week, which is pretty good by today's standards of staying at a company. And I oversee delivery at Radiant. So used to be a lawyer doing lots and lots of outsourcing deals, technology deals at Radiant, and now oversee the team, about 55 lawyers here supporting large companies doing lots and lots of commercial contracts where lawyers need to negotiate some messy deals. And we're really interested in exploring different ways of supporting businesses with legal work. And so this is a really interesting topic. So Lorna, I would butcher an intro. So I'm going to let you introduce yourself for everyone on the call. Why don't you go for it?
So I often describe myself as equally as a recovering lawyer, but still practicing law. But spent 35 years doing a lot of diverse work, a lot of different businesses. 20 years of that with GE, which, as you can imagine, was lots of change, lots of buying businesses, building businesses. But the common problem that I've always experienced are the operational ones of the team, how they work, and how we can cope with change and also get better. Not always easy for legal teams because of how we're reacting to the business. But, today, Ian, as you and I've talked about, I don't think it's hopeless. And I think there are some tools and techniques everyone can use, which really make that for themselves as an individual contributor, but also if they're running teams, really move the dial on how things get processed through the legal function and how everybody feels about their job today.
Amazing. And what are you doing now, Lorna, work-wise?
So currently I'm consulting. So moved from being an employed lawyer for 35 years, now doing consulting, which I'm really enjoying, because one of the things I wanted to do when I stopped in a full corporate life was just go and roll my sleeves up and get involved with different businesses and just use some of the things that I've learned and the mistakes I've made, by the way, everybody. I'm not saying I'm perfect. And then use those just to help other businesses that are going through change or needing to solve a problem.
Amazing. Well, let me introduce this topic and then we can get stuck into the weeds of it. I don't think it's a novel topic. I mean, I think everyone on the call recognizes it, but we see demands, expectations of legal departments just absolutely growing, and dramatically so, right? Just getting more and more. Not only that, the world of work is changing, kind of just physically, whether you're in the office, not in the office, right? Just the remote angle, kind of post-COVID, but also technology, etc., and more and more and more. But at the same time, right, size of teams, budgets haven't scaled in the same way. And this is a major pain point and we know that, the mantra, deliver more with less, right? That has been around for a very long time, just seems to escalate and keep escalating. And so I suppose that's what it feels like in 2026. You said you're the GC at GE, right, for like 20 years. Was that always the case? Did you feel like this was always the case when you were a GC, where, support was outpacing your resources?
Yeah, very much so, because GE, we were very lucky. We had a lot of success. We had a lot of change, and actually, it wasn't so much always the volume; it was just the mix as well. And I think, as we sort of talk today, one of the things is to remember is sometimes you might say we do contracts and we do other legal stuff. Actually, one of the things to think about is in both of those buckets, what does it actually look like? So that's also something that doesn't look like you've got more contracts, but it's hurting. What's changed? Right. So that was a feature that, as I reflect on things that really made life difficult at times, it was that. And of course, budget and headcount rarely keeps pace, because quite often we're a lagging indicator of work coming through. I think the other thing I would say is sometimes I think often we lack the data to have a meaningful discussion. And
Hmm.
so I would sometimes say, yes, it's difficult to get headcount and it's difficult to get budget, but perhaps because we're not speaking the same language as other teams that support the business. So that was a revelation from me a few years ago. Um, and some of the things we'll talk about today, Ian, cover that as to how do you think about how you work in a way that you can articulate it better to advocate
Hmm.
for yourself and your team.
Interesting. Um, should we speak about the Moscow framework?
We
Because that's,
could,
I know you passionate about that.
yeah,
I love it, by the way, because it sounds Eastern and exciting and espionage. I never knew what it was, right, until I spoke to you for the first time. And I've always thought Eisenhower Matrix. I've adopted this because I think it's
yeah,
cooler.
yeah. It is, and look, everything is anyone that's been any time as a lawyer, everything's a coping strategy. So
Right,
it's just ways to get yourself to think differently. And so when the team's exhausted, the
right.
budget's exhausted, what do you do next? And I think the next step is to say, well, how do we think about what we're doing? And this is, I always say with a bit of a health warning, this framework is not about saying this is something a lawyer shouldn't be doing, it's something below us. It is just helping you make choices in a world where your resources will be finite, but the asks of you could be, not infinite, but somewhere in between. So
Interesting.
it's all focused on ensuring that legal capacity in the business is focused on where it adds the most value. And so it uses Moscow. This is anyone who's, you'll all be far too young, but actually Moscow was something, some of the teams that use some of these methods very early were IT projects. They were
Sure.
very good at thinking about how to prioritize. And it's Moscow because it's must, should, could, and won't. And you'll see it's overlaid onto 4 boxes. So
Hmm.
what it's really trying to find is it's trying to find where are you spending your time today, and then step back and look at what is the unique contribution of a legal department, both
Mm.
what it is and what it should be. That's the musts.
Gotcha.
Then the shoulds are things which are absolutely critical to the team and yourself being effective. Now that's a combination of filling up the bucket mentally, physically, and intellectually, and also just thinking of ways that you can just be more efficient when you're doing your day job. So that is one of those things we said it's critical to effectiveness. So you've got to put some things in that bucket, because you can be the best lawyers in the world, but if
Hmm.
you're not paying time on the shoulds, something will not quite work in the musts. Then we get onto the fun bit, which is the coulds. And in
Yeah.
every organization, somebody spends time on coulds. Sometimes it's if you're in a cross-functional organization, you help each other out. That's just
Hmm.
part of it. But it's a danger area for legal. And I think
Okay.
it's one of those things that we sometimes spend time on things that we feel we should do. They're actually not things that are in our scope, or but we're withdrawing from our bank of time we have for the musts and shoulds and spending it on the coulds. And as you can say, won'ts are just low no value distractions, which you have to
Yeah.
catch yourself at and saying, I'm just going to stop. Um, I mean, Ian,
I like that. I like that the won't. It's quite definitive, right? It's like we will not do this. And and lawyers tend to be I think we're people pleasers, right? Like,
yeah,
sure, just add it to the pile of things. I'll just
yeah.
keep doing it. So I quite like that concept of there's things we will not do.
And I think it's also a question of thinking about your to-do list in a structured way, and actually categorizing it, rather than just thinking of like a massive long list, just having
Hmm.
an approach to think in my day and what I'm working on, that thing I'm about to do, where does it sit on my Moscow matrix? And am I about to do something? It could be at 7 o'clock at night, you're going to start a could. Actually, that's a sort of, hang on, that doesn't feel like something I should be exhausting myself on. Is there something more important, or should actually, for a
Hmm.
meaningful career and work life balance, should that just be when I stop and go and refill my physical and mental energy, and be ready for the must and should the next day.
I just, by the way, I think I need to, I should not show my wife this because I feel like I spend my life around the house doing the coulds. It's like gardening, a little bit here, there. Definitely not doing the musts and the shoulds on her list.
Well, I will say when I've used this in with teams, we have found ourselves saying, "Oh, I had a really good day,"
Interesting.
because you just realize sometimes you can't avoid it, but you
Sure.
just know that, for whatever reason, and it just became a self-awareness and actually a team, coping
Therapy
tool that
session.
we'd all
Yeah.
exchange to each other to say, "Oh, I've got a real problem. I can't get out of a could."
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it's a good way of thinking about it, and it's quite new to do to think. I always say ditch the vertical to-do list and try and think of it a
Mm.
different way. um I mean, I
So how do
think,
you,
yeah,
yeah, go for it.
I was going to say, I suppose you're going to say, how do you even know what you're going to put in the boxes, right? Because that,
Yeah, how do you start? How do you start that? Because I really like the framework of it's really easy, cool, sexy name, right? Smash should, could, won't. But like, how do you actually
yeah,
start, both as an individual and a part of a team?
and it's definitely a team exercise, by the
Yeah.
way. I mean, it works as an individual really well, but if you're doing it with a team, it's something you've
Yeah.
really got to just test together. It's not a top-down exercise. It has
Hmm.
to be a we solution.
Hmm.
um, and the first thing you have to do is just try and create an inventory, have a moment of truth, try and create an inventory where everybody gets in the room and says, okay, let's just think of everything we've worked on. Sometimes it's quite good to do a little bit of like some pre-work on that, just everybody track what they've done for a couple of weeks, you
Yeah.
know just bring it all out, full
Yeah.
amnesty of what you've done. um, and actually, one of the things I think is really important when you're doing this as well as a team is think, what are we not doing? um,
Right.
because there's certain things, legal departments tend to evolve over time.
Mm.
But I often say to people, imagine that your business now was forming a legal department for the first time. What would it ask you to be working on? And just test whether you're still doing that. I mean, one of my favorite questions is, if you hired a legal department, you might like the lawyers to know what the current law is.
Yes.
And which sounds like a funny question, but
Mm.
in fact, if you're always serving others, how are you replenishing the legal knowledge so that they feel, so everybody in the team thinks, I feel like I've had enough
Mm.
time to
Mm.
really know what the law is and I can communicate it to the business. So everybody wins from that. But you must make sure that as a function, you're not giving so much to others that you're not,
Mm.
not filling up the should bucket.
Hmm.
Um, I will say, every time I've done this, it's a pretty hard thing to do.
Sure.
And what becomes quite difficult is just where the value judgments comes on the must, shoulds, and coulds. And one of the things with the Moscow framework that we've shared, Ian, is look, it's just putting a framework around an exercise. It's a way of actually, if you've defined what's in each category, you can, those of you who've done any sort of exercise where you put things on sticky post-its, you
Yeah.
can all collectively say, where do we think this sits?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that, quite often, there's some things that will be no brainers, put it in. There'll be some things that people will really have to debate, or they'll have to say, well, I don't think. And that's just gives you a framework to objectify it, because it's not about
Mm.
what people are working on, is they're good or bad. It is just a thing of saying, where does this sit? What does this task really sit in? And should I think about it differently?
Yeah, yeah. And as you're right, stickies is so good. We've used a tool called Miro, which is
Yeah.
collaborative whiteboard, you have to use
Yeah.
it. And I mean, default there's a sticky function, right? And everyone just flies in their stickies. Um, do you find that when you do this initially, things land in the like, do you get lots of people saying these are all the musts and shoulds? Are those buckets full and the won't is not full, or do you find the won't is just packed full of things? Like, what does it look like when you
Um,
typically do it?
when I've done it before, the really tricky one for lawyers is how much is sitting in a could,
Okay.
because we are a service function, and
Cool.
of course, I think a lot of us trained in private practice law firms,
Hmm.
and actually, if you got paid for what you did, then it was
Sure.
valuable.
Yeah.
But when
Yeah.
you're in-house or you're in a different model, just because someone's paying for it, or like paying you to sit there, doesn't mean everything you do is valuable.
Mm.
So I think there's a few things to really explore. I mean, I think I've with teams we've had sort of heated debates about meetings
Right.
because particularly those that feel like validation and empowerment but soak up time, and
Yes.
actually the legal contribution and value is low, because the prize sometimes of getting promoted is being invited to a lot of meetings. But
Mm-hmm.
actually, if you find you're all going to lots of meetings but actually you're all there till late at night doing the day job, you have to start thinking about how, are there some that we make some choices around, and communicate that to the business intelligently, to say we've looked at where we're spending our time, we love coming to these meetings,
Mm-hmm.
not that we're just not showing up, but
Mm.
we have to find the balance.
Mm.
And I think the other one is, and we'll all recognize this, I still have it to this, I'll have it to my last day with my practicing certificate, is if we don't do it, someone will make a mistake or someone else won't do it. And I think lawyers are fantastic because we have a very high level of accountability. I
Yeah.
always describe lawyers as the people that went to their bedrooms to do their homework without being asked.
Yeah,
Very self-motivated.
that was
But
definitely
we
me.
all know ourselves. The downside of that is that we think, well, I'll just do it because I don't
Yeah.
want that not to happen.
Yeah.
And that's a could as well. That's a really an awareness bucket of thinking, how do we
Mm-hmm.
get out of those coulds? How do
Yeah.
we really make sure, or make sure we're not neglecting the warmer areas of our matrix?
Yeah. And I suppose it requires a bit of thought. Just because it's done a certain way doesn't mean that's how it has to be done always, right? Like that, you got to be honest with yourself that it could be done differently, maybe.
Yeah, and I think that's why I was talking about the mix of contracts, for
Hmm.
example, or even some of the other work, is just constantly being vigilant to what is causing the pain in
Hmm.
your process. What's a either you just don't have capacity for, or you don't know how to do well. And then and the more you understand what your contribution is, and what your mix of work is, you can start to make some pretty informed choice about that. So um, it may be that you don't stop something altogether, but you change the role or intensity of the legal department in relation to that. So it
Interesting.
may be there's, even with quite complicated contracts, it may be that over time they get quite repetitive and commoditized. And then the value add for your in-house legal team is sort of setting the framework for that, but they don't necessarily have to be the team that still process it, because lawyers are a very expensive resource. If they can pass their knowledge out for that in the right way, then that's a good thing. So it's not even simple contracts. Lower risk and value contracts, absolutely. If you've got
Yeah.
limited resource, think about that. Um, Operational tasks and processes, thinking about those. And even some things like, if you're meant to be doing, I was talking about knowing the law, if you're doing some horizon scanning, there are if you know what areas of law you're interested in, there are
Hmm.
plenty of
Absolutely.
company providers who can go and get that for you and package it up. And then you can look at it. So so again, the more you know about what you're working on and what the pain point is, then you say, well, how can we do that? How could we look at the should way of improving that? We know it's a
Hmm.
must, it's got to get done, but let's just think about how we could improve how we deliver that. And before we ask for the headcount, is there what are our options to do that differently?
Yeah. Saw a team the other day, maybe 3 weeks ago, where they had written down all the things that they do. And they had this list, team of about 16 lawyers, all pretty experienced, and they wrote a list. I think it was about 160 things that they as a team do. But it included things like a new person joins the team. This is part of their onboarding program. So I mean, this sounds like a big team, 16 lawyers. They feel they are under pressure, right? It's not like suddenly they feel stacked. They got all these things on the go. Um, but it was clearly a helpful, they hadn't categorized anything. It was a very helpful list of this is
Yeah,
all the stuff that we do. And they were just getting to okay, what should we do, and where do things fit? And then they were going to go to the next stage of like, well, are the things that we are going to do, how are we going to do them? It was quite interesting to see this progression, but it had to start with that list of like, bring all the stuff, right? Like everyone air your dirty laundry of where are the things that we're doing, um, including things that they had already started saying, things were, as you said, the things we're not doing that we should do, that we know we never ever getting to, and we know is important, and we should add to the list. Um,
I
I don't know how long
I
it took
I
that to do
make
that,
me
but
think of two things with that. Is one, it's actually if you know your process really well, and you and I both process people, so if you know your process really well, you can look for the things that in the shoulds I talk about something with meaningful payoff. So
yeah.
as I've with teams that use this most effectively, as we got to a certain point, we'd say we're not going to build a template for that because actually we know we do it once a year.
Hmm.
Yeah, and we could get a bit better, but somebody's going to spend an hour, 2 hours doing the template. Well, they may as well just figure it out when they do it. There's no
Yeah.
payoff for that. It doesn't, we used to use this phrase, doesn't self-fund. Like we don't get
Interesting.
payback for it. So
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
it that I think, because everyone thinks what we'll do, like an onboarding, we'll put together a process. How
yeah.
often do you actually hire somebody? Like if
Yes.
you're
Yeah,
hiring
exactly.
somebody every month, then
Yeah.
and everyone's scratching their heads and finding it, absolutely that will self-fund. If it's once a year,
Yeah.
you might just
Yeah.
go, if you've got musts and shoulds you should be doing, you'll just say, we won't get to that yet.
Yeah.
So again, you'll just think it's a laudable task, but it's not going to pay off. The other thing, and this is sort of a story that, anyone that's, that had worked with me on this, we used to say, like the dear Queen used to say, don't complain and don't explain. So we
Okay.
would quite often find that something would just not need to be done. And then we'd also find that we wouldn't do something and no one would notice. The things that people fought, died in the ditch for that was a must, nobody noticed. And
Yeah.
it never made a difference. So that's a winner. I'm sorry if you can hear my dogs barking in the background. It's a problem working from home on a Friday. But
Yeah, you know how it goes. Yeah.
but that's also what I'd say to people, calibrate stuff. If you're not
Yes.
sure, put it on the list and see how you go, because you might just find something doesn't change. So
Do you need to grab the door? Someone at the door there?
okay, so I'll be back in a second.
While Lorna's away, we've got this interesting concept that we think of the work through the lens of runners, repeaters, and strangers. So runners is normally 80% of what comes your way, and there's a lot that falls into runners. Repeaters comes out of the manufacturing world. Repeaters is something that comes up 15% of the time, and strangers is 5% of the time. And what's helpful is sometimes to think of what that 80% diet runners, let me solve for the runners. 15% repeaters I'll get to at the right time. And the strangers, the 5% of those weird things, as Lorna mentioned, like comes up once or twice a year, give that to your most experienced team member to solve at the time. Don't worry about the template, the playbook. Don't worry about any of that. Like solve for the 80% first, then solve for the 15, and you can get to the 5. Like don't even worry about that. You might never ever have a template for the 5%, and that is totally okay.
I think that's right. And as I said, I think the thing I always found, and like everyone that's worked with me on this template found it useful, is you just play with it a bit.
Yeah,
You'll just think something, you'll start with it. It's not about a game of perfection.
yeah.
80-20 rule, say you're probably there, and then just try. And then people might say, I've actually thought about it and something I really felt passionately about. I've realized there isn't any value add and I'm moving it
Yeah,
down to a could, or
yeah.
actually there's something I need to calibrate on. And you can just talk about that as a team and support each other. And it's an ongoing dialogue about where your expressed value is.
Yeah, and that value is important, right? Is like, what is the unique value that you as the legal team bring that only you as the legal team can
Yes.
bring? So that's the valuable stuff. And a lot of what we get stuck with as lawyers is, as you said, is it's operational work. It's like sometimes I see this, by the way, which is, could you please review this policy? And you're like, what do I have to add about that policy? And it's like just because it's A4 in a PDF does not mean it's my gig, and I'm
Yeah.
going to add I mean, I'll probably review it and opine on it because that's what we end up doing,
Yeah.
but it's not value adding. And a lawyer doesn't need to review it, do they?
And that's a classic could, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's sometimes you do it to keep the organization working. It's
Hmm.
part of inter department working. But the thing you must do is don't neglect a must or a should for it. And also don't do it at 7 o'clock at night when you're absolutely exhausted and you think, oh, one more thing from my to-do list, and I'll feel like I've achieved something today.
Hmm.
It's that thing of thinking, do you know, perhaps if I look at that for 20 minutes tomorrow morning, I'll do it super quickly. It won't matter while I have a
Yes.
coffee. But
Yes.
actually, I mustn't put it on my to-do list as something that is a priority. It's
Hmm.
knowing where you fit it.
Hmm. 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 I mean, so if you've obviously been with GE for a long time now, consulting. Um, if you're designing a team from scratch, um, like what would you design as like systems type work rather than individual lawyer tasks? Speak to me about that
Yeah,
systematizing things.
yeah. I think definitely repeat contracts.
Right.
So I definitely think one of the values of looking is that unique contribution of the in-house team. And then saying if the volume's gone up and it's of this type of contract, is it permanent that, or is it a spike,
Right.
or actually should we be doing that at all? I think it's also a question of not only what you do, but candidly where you do it, because
Sure.
in a global world, you
Hmm.
say, do you know, there's some really smart people out there that would just eat this up, and they can do it at a far better price point than I can do sitting in London. So
Sure.
actually, and they can also, because they may be working for other people, they can cope with the spikes. So actually the value for me is to tell them what I want and what the risk appetite is. Um, but look, I think there's some other things. I mentioned horizon scanning. I think knowing what the law is a really important part of a legal department's job.
Yeah.
Um, Perhaps as the legal department, you map what you're interested in, you understand what's relevant, but you
Hmm.
go and find someone that can do that monitoring for you,
Yeah.
probably AI enabled as well. A lot of the providers got really smart at how they consolidate all this information. Um, Entity governance, again, a lot of good software tools, a lot of processing where some outsourced providers can do it a stand up job. You might need someone coordinating in the middle, conducting, but just
Hmm.
try and think of, if you understand a process, and you and I spend a lot of time doing this, if you process map what you do, you can
Yes.
quickly see the parts of the job that you think, yes, somebody has to do that. Okay, it looks like it's somebody in the broad legal world, but
Yes.
then it becomes a question of, don't default to the person that's doing it today and making them quicker at it, even with a template.
Yeah.
Perhaps it's the question of, yeah, you could put it in a template and someone else could do that.
Yeah.
So
That's
I
so
think,
true.
I think that's why I think there's a lot of value. Lawyers are not very keen on process mapping. Um,
No, not at all. I don't know why though. I don't know if it's because we're afraid that we'll be exposed. I don't know. I've noticed the same pattern over and over again.
I think, and I'm speaking for myself as a recovering lawyer as I think about it over time. So I don't know if people on the podcast feel the same or the webinar feel the same, but we were so traumatized by the billable hour and
Yeah.
constantly having, particularly our personalities, plus having somebody saying, where did you spend your time today? Was it valuable? Why, or, are you really efficient?
Yeah. Yeah.
That
Yeah.
in some ways that translated to when, particularly when lawyers went in house, they said, I never want to do that again. I just want to have what felt like freedom was knowing, just being able to say, I'll decide. I'm
Mhm.
experienced, I've got good judgment. And in fact, I think what I found for myself, and definitely working with teams and businesses, I found is actually there's not really freedom in that. If you can understand more on your, like you're saying, your list of 160 things, and you sort of know, you prioritize and you rationalize, and then you say, oh, that's still really painful. Let's have a
Mhm.
look at how we do it.
Mhm.
It will free you up far more, because there's no freedom in not people not understanding what you're doing, or feeling that you've got to be accountable. You'll have a much better story to tell. um, and you trust the process of the process mapping and looking at it objectively.
Yeah.
It's about the process. It's not the people, as they say
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
Kaizens, and it's really important. It's really valuable. Try it. I mean, that's my thing. I think if you've tried it, you
Hmm.
find it such a revelation that you almost can't go back.
Yeah, I
Then
think
you're
that's
really
right.
obsessed with looking at it.
Yeah, because it also ventilates all the things that are going on, right? That the stuff that you kind of worry about in your brain of things going wrong because every single time it kind of happens different. It's never been mapped. You've never identified all the waste and the pain in there. And so it never gets better. You know what I mean? It stays terrible.
Yeah,
And every time that thing comes up, it's the worst, right? And some of these things come up all the time and it's the worst all the time.
yeah,
Um, yeah, I found that process mapping exercise just a simple swim lane, everyone in the room, draw out the process, honestly. Don't pretend that there aren't a whole bunch of cul-de-sacs in this process. And then go write up which points do you just hate? Like that are just the worst parts of this process that
yeah,
causes absolute frustration. And everyone gets very energized at that point. Like, let me tell you which parts are horrible, right? And then you can start to fix something. That
yeah,
Deming quote, I'm a big fan of Deming, where he says, if you can't describe what you're doing as a process, you don't know what you're doing.
yeah, yeah.
Just so good for us lawyers to hear.
Yeah, and I would also say that we're very fond of anecdotal evidence, and I think lawyers have, I think actually just the personality of people become lawyers. Certainly, if you've survived a few years in a, big law firm, you'll have a good sense for how something feels,
Sure.
but you can't articulate it in data. And one of my
Yeah.
favorite phrases I always use is legal is often a data-free environment. There's lots of wonderful advocacy.
Hmm.
We can't say, actually, we've realized we've been doing 100 contracts, 70 of them simple, 30 complicated, but they were known. We've suddenly got
Hmm.
to 150 and 100 are complicated. And actually, the math ain't mathing. We
Yeah.
can't make it work. And then
Yeah.
everyone can understand that. Then you say,
Yes.
that's my cost to serve model. That's what you set us up to do. You can see it. And it's a reasonable conversation. Whereas if you're just trying to describe how difficult your job is and you're without data, it's a cul-de-sac. It doesn't
It
go very
is.
far.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it is hard because you don't often have the tools. And sometimes you feel like you're just fighting fires. But someone once said, and he used to coach us, he was a professor of lean. And he said, piece of paper next to your desk and just go write down something happens. Just like write a log. And you can systematize things later and you can get back to it later, but just start to gather data so that
Yeah,
you can start to tell a story. And as you do that, you suddenly realize, oh, I need to think about this differently. That's actually two tasks, not one. Or I need to record about, I don't know, page length or something, or whose terms it's on, or whatever. And you start to collate data to start to think about legal as an operation, right? Because I think that's key for the legal department itself to be a systematized operation, not just this loose collection of lawyers.
yeah. It's not an artisanal activity where you're sort of making craft beer.
Mhm.
You're sort of trying to say or a beautiful chair. You're trying to say, look, at the end of the day, we've probably got to get 10 chairs out of the warehouse every week. How do we do that and still have meaningful careers? Because I think a
Mm.
part of this matrix, which, probably doesn't look like it, is it's about at the end of the day, you're really confident on what your contribution is and where you're spending your time. And you're feeling like you've done enough of the shoulds that you can
Mhm.
make some really good choices about when the work gets really hard. You've got some data points and some process that you've got in your mind to think, why, I was laughing about us saying I had a box 3 day, but you can articulate it to other people to
Yes,
say,
sure.
why am I getting dragged into that? What's happening? And
Mhm.
how can we get around it? So you're just much more analytical about what's causing the issues. And of course, if you do that, then you can solve things.
Yeah,
If
yeah.
you're just feeling the pain and you're firefighting, how do you recover from that problem?
And in contracting, this is where you start to like build a bit of an operating system, right?
Yeah. And I definitely, Yeah, I think, I mean, I was mentioning it earlier. I mean, I definitely think there's value to knowing all the different types of contracts, your activities, but like trying to build them into high volume, low complexity, all the way up to your more artisanal work. It's a new product. It's the first time we've done it. We're just going to have to lean in and figure it out. And then, for the ones, I mean, there's nothing that cannot have a playbook around it and some
Sure.
guidelines because it definitely helps. But if you can start to look at some of those things and look at the repeat things, you can say either it shouldn't be done by a lawyer at all,
Mhm.
or it shouldn't, or it needs to be done by
Mhm.
somebody, but it isn't really something that, like perhaps we're going to give to one of the big law firms. That doesn't, they're not really interested in that work either. Is there an alternative service provider we can find to say,
Sure.
we just need to, if this is what we're doing, how could we wrap somebody smart around that?
Mhm.
And then if they understand what is coming to them and actually how you want to do it, then it may just be a much better model altogether than trying to fix it with, the age old thing of I need headcount in the legal department to do everything, or I need a budget for a law firm. That the ASP model in the middle is so valuable. Once you understand what you're doing, then you've got
Mhm.
options. Then you've got
Yeah,
options. You understand it and you know who could do it.
100%. It's so interesting because I mean, the hot topic, obviously, if you're on anywhere near LinkedIn, is about AI, right? And how much VC money is flowing into legal AI. And I mean, it's interesting if you read Reddit versus LinkedIn, you get different stories. But it's a big topic, and there's a lot of advancement happening right now. There's a lot of change. Feels like the market has shifted from this legal as being very slow to innovate, and now you're seeing absolute bucket loads of people running towards innovation.
Yeah.
So, but that's got to slot into your legal operating system as well, right? So maybe you could talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, and I think I mean, I find, in my everyday working life, I find AI really useful.
Hmm.
But I also think you've got to be a little bit thoughtful if you're trying to get it to solve a problem for you, as you know what the problem is. So we go back to you and I sort of
Yeah.
looking at a pay point, and then I think there's a couple of interesting things you can do is AI by design in a process. And also when you're trying to fix a process, perhaps say AI by default. So when
Hmm.
you're looking at a process, say, okay, is there anything are we using AI effectively to solve that problem? Is it a question we haven't got enough people, or is it
Sure.
actually, okay, we've refined our process to a certain point, but when we look at that, is there an AI um, tool that sort of helps us add it to fixed human capacity? And you're really cooking on gas then, because it's an integrated system. And I think
100%.
you sort of said about an operating system, and I think that's absolutely right. Thinking of the legal department as having an operating system and a way of working, adding AI to the points where where it's a must, AI
Yeah.
must, or where it helps a should,
Hmm.
or gets you out of a could, then you
Hmm.
start saying, oh, hang on, so this is our problem. Is there anything that we could do? Could we have could we do something that there's a search, we add to our AI agent some information on frequently asked questions. So when people search it, we know they're getting to the right place, whether it's legal or compliance, all of those things, thinking, what's the pain point? Right. Is there something we're missing on
Yes.
our system that this could get rid of the pain point and let us focus on what really matters?
Yeah. 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 And obviously, you got to have the right infrastructure in place. Like, I know right now, plug in this tool, it will review the counterparty's terms and mark it up for me. It'll be glorious. Like that's the promise right now. But when you start working with the vendor, they will say, "What are your risk parameters? What do we care about?" So we can build your playbook. Then you'll go, "This takes some work, right?" So there is a little bit of work required to make these tools really help you fly in the right place.
And I often think there's a little bit, I've spent time trying to embed technology as well, where, the legal department get very frustrated because the technology gets bought and then they say, but I still have to look at the bill, or I still have to like put some data in. And you're saying, it's not at the moment, it's not like Elon Musk has wired something into your brain and you think it and it goes into the tool. It still needs that interface activity.
Sure.
And AI is a bit similar. People think it's just going to solve me for me, but you still have to have done the hard yards up front to really understand what your activities are, what are the critical musts, and actually within the musts, do you understand your process and your interaction with other parts of the business? Uh,
Hmm.
and actually what tools they might be using, or systems they're using. Because the other thing I think a lot of you have probably seen on AI, the Anthropic development with Claude, where everybody was building their own bespoke
Yeah,
legal
yeah.
special tool. They're different, lawyers are different. And overnight, people said, no, they're not really. We'll just have like an enterprise tool with a module. And so that's also the thing of just trying to think of efficiency and consistency with the tools you're using as well.
Yeah, which I suppose could shape your Moscow, because if you were plotting something for Q2, you might say, hey, there's some projects that actually land in those top two boxes because in Q3 you want to roll out X, right? And the amount of work you need to do is obviously very strategic, thoughtful, but you can move much faster than you used to be able to move. But if you don't put it on the must and should,
Yeah.
and therefore cascade things down off that list, you're not going to be able to do it, right? So important.
And the thing, I can tell you, my sort of team in the last team in GE Capital I had, we were sort of like pros at this and used it so much that we'd use it for our strategic planning. So the same
Right.
framework, just say, okay, for Q1, what's a must? So if it's a Q1 must, don't do a Q3 must
Yeah,
in Q1.
absolutely.
So actually, one of your coping strategies is time shifting. It's like, okay, don't do it at all, or don't do it yet.
Yes.
So again, if there's things that are coming up, you can say, actually, I can start to forward plan where my blips are going to be along my base load of work, and I've got a plan for that. So as you know, Ian, I'm quite evangelical about this, because I know for the first team I used it for, we found it really useful. I then went into an industrial business in France, which I thought none of that stuff I did with G Capital ever worked. We found it so useful,
So good.
and a completely different dynamic, different team, and they adapted it as well and adopted it. So it definitely is a multi-purpose tool that once you've used it, it's not copyrighted to me, it's something fairly
Sure.
generic out there, is that just try and use it, do it for your current job, and then just see, could we do the same? And we could use that for, how do we phase work over the year? Actually, let's just try and think of it that as well. I mean, Q1, what's my must for Q1? Must for Q2 is quite different. So that becomes a could. Don't start
Yeah.
working if you haven't got
Yeah.
the.
Yeah. That's a good point. I always think it must go to the should box, but actually, no, 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 it comes down.
Yeah,
It's a you
yeah,
could do it. Yeah, yeah, it's a good.
yeah. It's a very interesting. Yeah, try it and use it is my suggestion.
We are about to run out of time. I just realized that what the time is because, and this I told you these webinars always fly. There's so much I wanted to speak to you about the actual business impact of this because I think that is
Yeah,
needs to be top of mind. It's not just again you could just do stuff, but you got to bear in mind that values in the eye of the customer and our customer is the business, right? And so how does this translate to value? But we can get that to that another time. I wanted to ask you, Lorna, closing thoughts. Imagine you were, I don't know if you'd want to do this, but imagine you were stepping into a GC role afresh today. I mean, what would your priorities in terms of fixing things, tackling things look like first off the bat?
so I always want to know the data, which is sort of unusual. And I realize for a lot of general counsels, sort of, they step back and they think, no, I don't want to know that. I really want to know the data. I love the data. It's how my mind works, is to see. And then, because I think we've got good instinct,
Hmm.
always as general counsels, but actually to really be able to assess things objectively, understand your role, understand your cost and efficiency, and like how you become excellent, how your quality improves, which is what the business payoff is, how you
Yeah,
get that expressed value, the whether it's speed, speed, time, cost, all those things trading off. If you're not measuring it, you have no idea if you're getting better. You just know how
yeah,
something
true.
feels. Um, and I think the other thing is, I don't think legal are exempt from continuous process improvements. I think when Lean and Six Sigma came in, a lot of legal teams said, I don't think this is anything to do with us.
Yeah,
Um, I have used it extensively. I've been very lucky to be at General Electric for all these years, and we've gone from Six Sigma to Lean Six Sigma to Lean, and I have definitely seen it make night and day change of doing it. But it really is as simple for lawyers saying, know what you're working on,
totally.
understand some data around it, try and measure it, try and change it, and then see if it made a difference.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
and it's really those things I think are so important.
And we can make a material difference, real world impact, not just for our customers, like that things that get better for our customers, i.e. our business stakeholders, even though they might annoy us sometimes, but like it gets better for the business. But it's also better for us as a
Yeah,
team. And I think there's this line that I love, which is, what it's something, is it better for your customers and simpler for your people?
yeah,
And I quite like that because it's like it's got to tick both boxes. There's lots that you could just do to please everyone, but be terrible for your people. So short term, but hey, it's both sides, and there's a lot that we can really change, drive innovation in a way that's going to be good for all corners.
absolutely. Great
Lorna,
to end
we're
on.
over time, but thank you so much for your time. It was really good hearing from you. This morning, by the way, I wrote 4x4 on a piece of paper, and I wrote my must list. It was really good. It was really, really helpful to my day. So thank you.
Pleasure. I'll
Great
be
speaking.
happy to sit down and go over it with you. I'm always here to hear about your box 3 days.
Amazing. Thanks, Lorna.
All
Speak
right. Thanks,
soon.
everyone.